Bill McKibben, welcome to Conversations.
It's good to be with you.
It's great to be with you, too. I've been following your work for a long time and so appreciate it. And let's start out by telling our listeners a little bit about 350.org and the history, and then what's happening here in Copenhagen.
Sure. Look, you got to start with the science. That's where all conversations about climate change need to begin and end. 350 is the most important number in the world. We didn't know it 2 years ago until American scientists, led by Jim Hansen at NASA, produced a series of papers showing that 350 parts per million CO2 was the most we could safely have in the atmosphere if, as they said in the abstract of one of those papers, we wanted a planet similar to the one on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. That's strong language. It's stronger language still when you know that we're well past 350 already. We're at 390 parts per million and continuing to rise 2 parts per million per year. That's why the Arctic is melting. That's why the American Southwest is in an epic drought. That's why Australia is on fire. That's why seawater is turning acid, on and on and on.
Now, once we hit those levels, my understanding is you can't really go back.
No, you can go back.
The
Earth's forests and oceans sequester carbon from the atmosphere each year. Were we to
stop burning
fossil fuel, were we to stop burning fossil fuel over a period of time, the CO2 level of the atmosphere would begin to drop. The youngest people on the planet now would be old people before we got back to 350. Damage will be done in the meantime. We're not going to stop global warming. But if we act very, very quickly and very, very dramatically, then there's a chance we can keep it from getting entirely out of control and passing many more tipping points. We've already melted the Arctic. That one looks pretty much done. But we've got to take that warning and do everything we can to put on the brakes.
And the recent news from Greenland is very discouraging also.
There's no shortage of sobering news. If you read Nature or Science, the two big periodicals, each week, then each week you get a new dose of information, each of it indicating that it's worse than we thought.
A new dose of reality. What about the reality here in Copenhagen at COP15?
Well, the reality here, of course, is that as we get towards the end, naked power is doing its best to assert itself. The U.S. and a few other great powers are trying to dictate the terms of some agreement. The computer jockeys running the numbers said last night that if you add up all the proposals that have been put forward, it yields a world in the year 2100 with an atmospheric concentration of 770 parts per million CO2. That's if that's not hell, then it has a remarkably similar temperature. So that agreement would be a bad thing. There have been remarkable efforts by the smallest countries in the world to stand up to that. They've had, for the first time, the backing of a big global movement, 350.org, thanks to many of your listeners and people like them all over the planet. In October, conducted what CNN called the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history, with 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries demanding fidelity to that 350 target. That's been enough to really help the small countries withstand some of the pressure from the big ones. These are the countries that face the most imminent threats to their survival: drought-stricken African nations, low-lying island nations, high mountain nations whose glaciers are melting quickly. They'll probably have to cave in the next couple of days in the face of all that economic might that the developed world represents, but it's been good to see them put up a fight. This process will obviously have to go forward for the next year. We'll continue to try to build that movement and push for real change.
Yesterday, Dr. Hagen and I attended the Deforestation Partners meeting with a very strange conglomeration of people from Duke Energy to Wangari Maathai, who didn't show up but sent a message, and many of the organizations that I've been supporting for years. What's your thoughts about RED, and what do you feel are some of the pitfalls of it?
I haven't been following the RED negotiations as closely as I should. As usual, the key to successful stuff is scale. If you can keep the huge industrial uses of forests kind of out of the picture and do these things with the people who live there on a scale that makes sense, then it can be extremely beneficial.
One of the things to me that's most inspiring about your organization, and of course it started, I guess, when you in Middlebury College, but is the young people.
Yes.
And the power of the voice and the incredibly innovative ideas and solutions that should be being listened to. Do you feel that their voice is being heard? And talk about some of the things you see them doing that are working.
Well, in official circles, of course, young people just patronized and patted on the head and sent out of the room while the adults do the real work. That's what's going on over at the conference. I tend not to think that much about the age of the people we work with. They are mostly young. Partly that's because most people around the world are young, given the demographics of this planet. But they do have a particular set of talents. One is a visceral sense of how the wired world works. They grew up with the web. They know both its possibilities and its limitations. And so we're able to use electronic means very effectively to enable things to happen in the real world on the ground, which is still where things need to happen. So I greatly like working with the young people we work with, but I don't think of them as young people. They run our organization. They're just colleagues.
Yeah, good. Just in bringing to a close, let's talk to some of our listeners about what's at stake and about what they can do about it, because I think people feel a little overwhelmed by the entire process and what's happening. How can people make a difference?
Well, in the next day or two, they can make a difference by letting our leaders know that we want a strong text. It's not going to win the day necessarily, but it's very useful to register that sense. If you go to 350.org, we've got a tool up on the website that'll tell you just how to be in touch with people around the U.S. government who are at these negotiations and register your sense of things. But in the slightly longer run, we need more organizing and more places to build this movement ever larger. 350.org, for whatever reason, has emerged as the biggest vehicle for doing that. And so people are invited to come help us or to figure out other ways. I think that the key thing, the reason that we've been successful is because we have a very simple message that allows it to break through the din, concentrated very much on the physics and chemistry of this problem in an understandable way that unites people around the world. And so that's what we'll keep doing.
I noticed a lot of attention here shifted from the parts per million to the temperature, and I think that's something that more people are listening to. Are you corresponding this to?
Yes, both of them. It's the 1.5 degrees Celsius and 350 parts per million. They're more or less. The problem with temperature targets is just that we really have no very good idea of how much carbon produces what temperature.
Yeah.
What we know is how much carbon the world can deal with, because we have long geological record to give us some sense.
Great. Any last words before we close?
No, just thanks to everybody who's been helping us at 350.org, and there have been many in your area. It's going to be a continuing battle.
Yeah. Well, Bill McKibben, I just want you to know, for all of our listeners, thank you for the tireless work, and hopefully we can cut down on your carbon footprint a little bit by getting more technology in your back room.
That's it. Thank you guys very, very much.
Take care.
All right.
All right, Bill.